Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the minor gods in Age of Mythology Retold. Specifically, the Atlantean minor gods for 1v1, based on the current trends, if you will, in the multiplayer meta as it is. Keep in mind, there's still a long way to go until things are settled. There's still plenty of things that people are discovering, build orders that people are discovering that are really powerful. So it's not settled. Things are subject to change. But anyway, to talk about the Atlantean minor gods, we gotta start with Leto, who is F tier. Probably F tier minus. In fact, she's so bad that I would dare say that Fa deserves a bit of a tier up. Basically, her myth units, meaningless. Her upgrades, kinda, maybe. Her god power, pointless. There is nothing that Leto provides that is of any use in any game whatsoever. None at all. Simple as that. There are better gods, there are better god powers, there's better upgrades, there's better myth units. Automatons just flat out don't work. So when you combine all of this together, you end up with a really terrible god. Say what you will about Fa. He can at least give you a farming benefit, which is not insubstantial considering longer games, if the meta were to shift towards longer games. But as things currently stand, Leto is just flat out worthless, with the exception of just giving you some pierce benefits, pierce defense benefits, which can be useful in very limited situations, but having a god that has very, very little on offer besides that, or pretty much none at all, just makes her completely pointless. Then we have Prometheus. He's an S tier. Easy S tier. You see the contrast between, say, Leto and Prometheus? Prometheus gives you a really good god power that buffs your economy, buffs your military, saves you money in the long term, and is just really useful. He gives you Prometheans, which are pretty solid myth units as well. In fact, Cronus Prometheus rushing is one of the tactics that can propel people high up the ladder. So that is another factor that works in his favor. His upgrades are also very beneficial. Like everything that you would want from a god, Prometheus has it. He has a god power that's always useful. He has a myth unit that is useful, that's pretty solid, cheap, and solid, and strong, that is. He has upgrades that are also really useful to get. Then we have Oceanus. Oceanus is a bit of an interesting one to rate. On one hand, he's obviously no Prometheus. On the flips, and the Carnivora god power is worthless. On the flip side, however, I would dare say his upgrades are good, really solid. He has healing as a myth unit, which means you lack direct combat power, but you more than make up for it in terms of the healing, or kind of make up for it. I would say that he's not quite up there to deserve an A tier, but that's because the way the current meta works, having a combat myth unit in H2 is actually very, very important, as opposed to a support myth unit. If the meta changes to favor longer games, I would certainly say Oceanus would be far more useful. As it stands, Carnivora is kind of a joke. His upgrades are useful, but his myth unit just doesn't work. It's a bad myth unit. You know, having healing is not bad at all, and in fact can allow you to get other choices done that you wouldn't do otherwise. But on the flip side, it just doesn't fit necessarily all that well within the current meta. Then we have Rhea. Rhea is, honestly, I'd say she's C tier. Her god power is only useful if you're dealing with an opponent that is getting big single entities and only a handful of them. Like if they have a lot of them, becomes meaningless. But your opponent knows that and can just not build those units. I mean, sure, it limits their potential, but what are you going to do? Like, your god power suddenly becomes something that's not really all that great. I mean, sure, it hurts your opponent and limits their choices, or just forces them to get a bunch of those big single entity myth units before they commit to an attack. That can be useful. Her myth unit is good as siege, but compared to Hydras, compared to mountain giants, behemoths are nowhere near that level. Let me be clear. Jotuns are powerful. Hydras, slow, but powerful. And powerful in general. Behemoths, they're slow. They do regenerate HP, but so do Hydras, and they don't do anywhere near the level of damage that Hydras can do. Let alone the fact that Dionysus provides other significant benefits as well. So I just don't think like Rhea is really worth it all that much. Hyperion. He does have a good unit, even if it's a ranged unit that's slow, but it's the combat potential of satyrs is not something to be underestimated. His god power can be a good disable ability. Like if you're dealing with an enemy army, you can just put it on a portion of it maybe, have them fight each other. It's not going to do as much damage, but it's going to cause chaos. That's literally what it does. His upgrades, really good, so I think Hyperion is an easy A tier. Maybe even an S tier, though I don't necessarily think he quite makes the cut. He doesn't have just, say, the wow factor as, some of these other gods that are in S tier. But still, a very, very useful choice. Then we have Theia. Theia, I think, is an S tier. Good upgrades, good myth unit, actually good myth units. Her god power may not be the substantial combat upgrade that you might expect, but on one hand, you do get myth units that only cost one resource. Sure, they have a limit, but they only cost one resource, and they're trained really, really fast. Dryads are a substantial upgrade, and it has been buffed. And on top of that, the Stymphalian bird is an extraordinarily good myth unit. Because one of the significant benefits it has is it's a flying myth unit that's kind of hard to take down. You can use, like obviously if you're dealing with Egyptians, maybe not that great. But otherwise, it can force your opponent into building units that they wouldn't necessarily build otherwise to begin with, or take a lot of punishment in return. And the fact that it's flying gives you so much potential in a battlefield that's not even funny, and you can always pull it out in a lot of ways. That is really powerful. So, good myth units, 2 myth units, because I am counting Dryads kind of as a myth unit. It's really hard to go wrong with Theia. Hyperion, don't get me wrong, he has a lot of benefits, but I think like Theia just has that extra edge that makes her an S tier minor god in Retold. Then we have Hecate, fairly solid god. The myth unit is more of a support myth unit, but it can really help turn the tide of battle. Don't underestimate that myth unit or the upgrades that she's providing you. Although, maybe the upgrades would be better suited with a different myth unit, so that is a bit of a shame, I would dare say. I think, like, Hecate is probably B. Like, she's strong, but the thing is there are better choices. Speaking about better choices, we have Helios. Helios has flat out, from my perspective, the single best myth unit in H4. That is strong. He doesn't have the best god power, though. That's the reason he doesn't get an S tier. He has a mobility god power, which again, given the meta, like it's the same aspect with Shifting Sands, it's the same aspect with Underworld. It's not quite there, really. And can be a hassle, actually. He has a strong defense benefit. Basically, Helios would be S tier if games were lasting longer. As opposed to where they are right now, where a lot of games the vast majority of games don't go over 20 minutes, which means you're not getting long H4 games. If games were long in H4, he would be S tier. Strong defense benefit and cheap defenses over there. A siege benefit for tier 4 siege units. Again, just lots of benefits with this guy. Don't underestimate that. But at the same time, I just don't really think he makes the cut of S tier. Then we have Atlas. Atlas is an A tier, not S tier. His god power really strong. His upgrades kind of situational. That's the problem. Like his god power, like seriously, the sole reason Atlas is A tier as opposed to B or C, his god power can win you the game. Like it does so much damage. It screws over the opponent. Like not only do you have a god power that does a ton of damage, but it also disables an opponent's army and their economy during that process completely. Like, and then obliterates their army and economy, more or less. So during the time that Implode is cast, you can do other things. You can just cast Implode, use a scout, cast Implode, do a lot of damage to an opponent before a fight, during fight, whatever. And either have your army going out to raid or just doing damage, in the areas of the enemy base that are not infected by Implode, and then just finishing the job. That is really, really strong. His myth unit, not really that great. His upgrades, not really that great. But that god power, it's hard to argue against Atlas, suffice to say. Like, this is one of the few cases where you have a god that is so strong just because of the god power that they're elevated because of it on this tier list. And that's all I had to say. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.